Melanin, a substance produced by cells within the epidermis. The DNA we inherit from our parents dictates how much is created. Simply put, melanin works to protect our skin from the rays of the sun. The more melanin, the darker the skin. This one factor within the millions of other bodily functions has dictated so much of our human history and even society today. This one substance has split the human race into tribes, groups, countries, and even hierarchies, where stigma based on color of skin and racial grouping has led to all means of discrimination, oppression, slavery, murder, and even genocide. True, we have come far from days gone by, but so deep-rooted the connotations based on this melanin, we find almost every element of society still affected by it. My name is Rauf Shokoya, and I came to Shia Islam about 22 years ago. In my time, I've come to see how race and colour have affected us within our community also. This documentary aims to profile various different community members. In the aim, we reflect and self-analyse as to what effect race and skin colour affect our opinions and mentalities today.
I just find lighter skin more beautiful. It's just accepted. Everyone agrees with that, you know?
Racism is a double-edged sword. If I think that I'm better than you because I'm lighter than you, then I would automatically think I am more inferior to the person who's lighter than me.
They are willing to give their daughter to a Hindu who would embrace Islam, but a born practicing Muslim African origin would be ignored.
Because you are seen as being part of the other, you're not fully accepted into the community as an equal.
Because you wanted to marry Muslim, but you're being told you're just not good enough, yeah?
I've come to the Islamic Centre of England to speak to Sheikh Ahmed Hanif, who is of course a sheikh but is also black. I want to ask him whether or not he has suffered racism in the Hausa. He has spent 20 years studying there. We want to know whether racism exists where we would least expect it.
One cannot say that you have racists in the Hausa, but you do find racist attitudes, okay, that people inherit from their environment. You do find that. You do find that, for example, some of these attitudes are being reinforced by questionable hadith and so forth, you know. You do find, for example, blacks being poorly portrayed in the poems of Saadi, you know, Rumi. You know, you do find that type of thing. Usually the racism that you find among people in the Hausa being very superficial, okay, based upon aesthetics or based upon, you know, sexual proclivities or based upon things like that, you know, but not based upon a theory of the inferiority of a human being over another, yeah. You know, I mean, so an example of that, an example of this racist attitudes, okay, is I remember one time, it was the anniversary of the martyrdom of Imam Jawad alayhi salam, where, you know, usually between the Dhuhr and Asr prayer, you know, the sheikh leading the prayer would give a short khutbah on the life of the Imam whose day we are commemorating. And he had about, like, let's say 10 minutes to give a talk, right? He spent 6 or 7 of that 10 minutes trying to explain away Imam Jawad alayhi salam's darkness, right? Which indicated to me how important color was to him, you see? And so you find things like that are taking place. You know, people cannot accept or refuse to accept darkness of skin as a characteristic of the Imams, because they believe that darkness of skin is an aib, right? Is a drawback, is a defect. You know, and our Imams are perfect. So therefore, by definition, they cannot be black. Okay? You know, light-skinned Arabs think of themselves as better looking than dark-skinned Arabs. Light-skinned Pakistanis think of themselves as better looking as dark-skinned Pakistanis. You know, have you ever seen an Indian movie or Pakistani movie where the lead role was given to a darker colored Pakistani or Indian. You haven't, right? And this is something sort of like hardwired into their system, okay?
What, in your opinion, do you think are the roots of racism specifically in the Shia community here in the UK?
That's an interesting one. I think the roots of racism in the Shia community, and by extension the Muslim community, I think begins in the mother countries, I would say, right, at the source. Where in many of these countries, Asian countries and also Arab countries, I don't know if one can call it racism as such, right? Because racism is, I think one can define racism as the belief, okay, based upon myth or pseudoscience that another person, by virtue of race, is inferior, you know? I don't think that many Asians or Arabs think about other races as inferior, but I do believe that they have a certain type of color prejudice among them, okay, which can vary in intensity, you know, where, for example, the lighter colored you are, okay, the more aesthetically pleasing you are to the people. Also, it is wrapped up with I would call it maybe classism, you know, where, for example, if you have too many people of one particular ethnic group being overrepresented in menial jobs and so forth, it tends to reinforce an idea that such people are only capable for menial tasks and so on. So I think it begins there, okay, right? Then when they come to an environment like this one, which has real racism, okay, they tend to ally themselves with the ruling class, okay, identify their interests with the ruling class, and therefore look down upon those other classes of people, those other races of people that society looks down upon, you see?
Okay, so tell me about mosques, and you know, in a more general sense here, of course.
You don't really find overt racism on the part of the people who run the mosques, you know, or who are involved in activities of the mosques. You don't find that. You do find it among the ordinary people who come to the functions in the mosque, right? So you'd find that a lot of black people, for example, tend to be put off going to a lot of mosques in Ramadan. Why? Because at that point, everybody comes to the mosque, you know, and there will be people coming to the mosques bringing these attitudes with them. And, you know, of course, you know, racism is a double-edged sword. If I think that I'm better than you because I'm lighter than you, then I would automatically think I am more inferior to the person who's lighter than me, okay? Right? So you'll have a lot of people who are anti-black racists who are also pro-white supremacists, okay? By thinking of themselves as being inferior to white people and wanting to be like them in order to overcome their own sense of inferiority, okay? So you'd find that, for example, the reaction to white people who are converts, for example, is very different to the reaction of them to black people, okay? With black people, it is a congratulations, I'm glad that you became a Muslim, welcome. With a white person is, thank you for becoming a Muslim, you verified the truth of our religion, and by the way, are you married? Okay? Because they need to get their grandchildren a little lighter, so they move up the scale of completion and perfection and so forth, right?
Sheikh Hanif has always had a way with words. Furthermore, he's grasped many of the issues that face members of the Shia community. What he had to say about some of the attitudes at the Hawza did disappoint. But on the bright side at least, these issues weren't overt and mainstream. I'm on my way to meet Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi, who coordinates all family affairs at the Islamic Center. Marital affairs makes up the bulk of his work. I want to know how often race plays a role in the cases that he deals with.
We live in a cosmopolitan city. London has everything. You can find any kind of religious activity, and you can find any kind of corrupt activity, and any kind of culture exists. So the result is that it is going to lead some people into mixed race marriages, and we are witnessing that in the society, non-Muslim society, and Muslim community also is going through this, and especially Shia Muslim community. And there is no doubt there is a lot of resistance in quite a lot of cultures. We had case of an Iraqi lady was not given permission by family and was threatened to be disowned if she married a non-Iraqi Arab family. And the non-Iraqi Arab was Shia Muslim and accepted Islam. There was no problem from education's point of view, there was nothing. But because Iraqi culture says or dictates them that they should not give their daughters to outsiders, they don't. Although the ice is breaking and more such marriages are taking place. Within Indian and Pakistani community, they tend to accept a Hindu or Sikh more easily than accepting someone from Europe or from Africa or from other culture.
I guess that's because of the cultural
the
similarities.
Culture takes over, even religion in some cases. I've been to Guyana and I've witnessed so many Muslims there. They are willing to give their daughter to a Hindu who would embrace Islam, but a born practicing Muslim African origin,
Afro-Caribbean,
African origin would be ignored. We had a case, the father was not happy for his daughter to be married to someone from outside culture. The faith and madhab and everything was there, and our policy is that we don't do marriage without the father's consent if the marriage is done for the first time for the lady. I mean, we don't accept and don't do the marriage at all. Then we approached the father, and his only objection was the race. So we gave warning that this is not the reason to stop and prevent your daughter from marrying this person. And the father said, doesn't matter, I don't accept and I will not take part in the wedding or anything. And then we did the marriage without the father's consent. So it happens, it does happen in some cases.
It's sad that some parents will not give their consent to their child's intended partner to marry due to the race of the proposed spouse, especially when considering that the Prophet and the Imams would not condone such attitudes. In fact, our traditions indicate that the Prophet and the Imams married women from different parts of the world. I've come to meet a really talented brother from the community. Most of you know him by the name of Ibrahim Sincere. He wrote a really interesting piece on racism and shadism and how we're somehow programmed to deem lighter is nicer. We want to know what his experiences have been and what inspired him to write this piece of poetry.
Underneath the sugar coating, the bitter taste of reality is still the same. Nobody wants to actually discuss race. And when we do, and we challenge those racial perceptions hidden away, they say that we segregate, and our claims cause distasteful discrepancies. If we were to say that history and the foundations of capitalism have left such a legacy that every single one of us still suffers from white supremacy. And that's an uncomfortable term, isn't it? It all gets a bit uncomfortable when we start to discuss white privilege. And don't get it twisted, my comparatively lighter skin tone means I also acknowledge my privilege. Like I'm somehow less animalistic than those darker than me. And partly, it comes with the idea that the whiter the skin, the more morally supreme. See, I just want you to open your subconscious and question what you really believe. How else can we really be free? Being lighter is nicer. It's a thing we seem to accept. But again, I seem to be skipping ahead. And times have changed. We can go further.
Before we talk about your experiences, from a general perspective, would you say there's racism in the Shia community?
A lot of the racism that people face, or a lot of the racism that manifests itself, is very subtle, it's very behavioral, it's more in the way people act, or the way people talk to you, or the way people talk to others, rather than explicitly what they say, because most people know and understand, or they know that it's not socially or even morally acceptable to say certain things. But if they have an internal issue, or if they have some internal racism, usually that comes out in the way that they act. So a lot of the times, racism is picked up, or you feel it in the vibe and the energy that you get from certain people. And the problem with that is, because you can't explicitly pinpoint it and explicitly provide some material evidence for what exactly it was, a lot of the time if you discuss it or if you speak about it, other people who do not face that issue, or they do not know what it feels like, they would say that, you know, you're being paranoid, or you have a chip on your shoulder. So that makes it very difficult to address, and also very dangerous, because it kind of goes under the radar for a long time.
So tell me, from your understanding, what do you think is causing this mentality or this behavior, explicit or implicit? And from your experience, again, do you feel that this is something that is particular to the majority of the members of the community, or just some?
When the Brits had colonies in both East Africa and India, what they had done is they had moved slaves over from India into East Africa, and this was called the indenture system. But what they did is, when they moved these Indian slaves into the plantations in East Africa, they had placed them at higher positions than they had placed the native Africans within the entire structure, within the entire in the hierarchy. So they've already created this social system where the white man is the master and he's at the top. In the middle you have the brown people, and at the bottom you have the black people. So they already created this type of shade hierarchy. So when slavery had finished, and the Brits had, officially left, they had already left the foundations for this society where this hierarchy exists. And if you go to East Africa today, you will see it visually with your eyes, the exact same hierarchy. So even when they had come out of slavery, or the people who were carried on migrating from India to East Africa for purposes of business, Indians or Asians were going into a society where they were already to enjoy a certain level of privilege, a certain level of a higher class. Because of where they were within the slave system, they had more opportunities available to them when they came out. I think that there is a way that this mentality can evolve, or has evolved, that again is just as dangerous, and it becomes even more subtle and even more subconscious. This also transcends spirituality and social statuses also into ideas of beauty, and I think it's something that is very accepted and widely accepted, and it may not seem as something important or damaging as a lot of the other ways racism manifests itself, but in many communities, not just the South Asian communities, even in Black African communities, Caribbean communities, Arab communities, we live in a society around a certain mentality where it is as if a female's beauty is her defining characteristic. And that, combined with this idea that lighter skin and whiter skin is more beautiful than darker skin, I can't speak on behalf of females because I'm not a female, but there are many young girls growing up with deep psychological insecurities because they are being driven and rammed with this idea that lighter skin is more beautiful. And there may be Especially, of course, this is going to affect girls that have darker skin because they're going to be growing up and they might hear their aunties, you know, praising and blessing some other girl from the family because of how blessed and fair skinned she is. And so girls are growing up with a very deeply embedded psychological insecurity about their own skin color. So I think that just an example of one of the ways that it can transition into the next generation. But in general, when it comes to the ideas of superiority and supremacy socially, I think those are being phased out in the younger generations. But it's these things that need to be understood for what they are, because a lot of people think it's just natural preference. You know, I just find lighter skin more beautiful, or it's just accepted. Everyone agrees with that, you know. But these are the things that now need to be understood for what they are and for where they come from.
So, alhamdulillah, I just had a very interesting discussion with Ibrahim Sincere. One thing that comes across again is that racism in this day and age, in 2015 at least in the UK, is definitely not overt. So it happens, but it's more covert. One of the examples, explicit examples he gave was the how people tend to appreciate somebody who is lighter than themselves, or how we tend to grade people according to the color of their skin or the shade of their skin. So we can be from the same community. We could be Asians or we could be Africans, yet we still have a preference for the lighter. And I think one of the good things that Ibrahim Sincere has done is he's tried to educate us in understanding, or at least, trying to appreciate where this mentality has come from and how this is possibly some sort of inferiority complex that we have. So I think this is definitely something that we need to all be thinking about within ourselves, whether this is something that we suffer from, and of course try and find ways of overcoming it. The Khawaja community make up a significant percentage of the Shia community here in the UK and in various parts of the world. They migrated to East Africa from Gujarat in India and subsequently to Europe and North America. Having set up an elaborate federation of all their community centres, they set up a membership criteria that incorporates ethnicity as part of their constitution in order to protect their identity and the objectives of their overall organisation. Many deem this as racial segregation that can have supremacist tendencies. We want to know more.
When people came from Gujarat, Kutch, they came on the basis that they came on a migration, and that migration was quite substantial and extensive. They went to Zanzibar. They were Ismailis in the first instance, and then they split in an environment that the Khawajas felt was alien. They were migrating to this environment for economic reasons, but it was alien in the sense that they did not have the traditional kind of support, so they had to create a community that would provide a kind of a family for the entire congregation. And so that was it was very easy to say, we are Khawajas, and this is our community. In the same way as I say, I am Rahim, and I belong to Rahim family. And no one can ever tell me that because I say I belong to Rahim family and I identify how people belong to Rahim family, that I'm discriminating against anyone else who is not Rahim family. Because my interaction with others will determine how I deal with them. But there can be no discrimination per se by virtue of the definition of myself as a Rahim. So in the same way, when the community said, we are Khawaja community and our membership will consist of Khawaja communities, we will contribute our resources to this community, but will make available the services to all and sundry. When we moved to UK, to Europe, and to America, came under various new developments. So the first development that we had was this need that we should have a global organization, the World Federation, that's going to coordinate the policies of all these Jamaats and regional federations and take us to the fulfillment of our mission. What was the mission? the loyalty to the school of Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam, and propagating that madhab and the religion and the teachings of the school of Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam, and also our commitment to marja'iyah. We have had a line of marja from the time of Mohsin Hakim, Burujardi, Golpaigani, Ayatollah Khoy, Ayatollah Sistani, line of commitment to the marja. And the other thing that we found was, now that we come to places like Europe, we have now non-Khojas. We have a lot of people around us. So the non-Khojas are there now. They are coming to our mosques because they are all welcome. And the interaction is with the Pakistanis, with Iraqis, with Iranis, with people from all over. And we all kind of get together and kind of interact with each other. And that still doesn't make a difference in terms of the membership, in terms of our identity, because the Khoja identity is retained. But then what happens when you intermarry? So we have now got so many intermarriages that was confronted by the evolution of a system by which we redefined Khoja. We said a Khoja is not only a Khoja who originally comes from that group of people from Gujarat, Kutch, and now from East Africa, but a Khoja is a person who marries a Khoja spouse will be treated as Khoja
regardless of the gender.
Regardless of the gender, and the children will be regarded. So we now have an evolution of people, assimilation of people through intermarriages. And if you have this continuing, as I can foresee, we'll get lots of people who are now entering into the Khoja community, Khoja institution.
Are there any other instances, examples, or situations whereby somebody would be able to become a member without marrying into the Khoja community?
There are communities in the UK, I won't name them, who have had Iranian, Iraqi, and Afghani communities living together and coming to the mosque, and they decided that we will keep membership on a flexible basis. So we now say, okay, anyone can be a member, but we keep some measure of insurance that, look, our mission remains the same. Now we're giving you membership, you have the right to vote, you can even stand as a committee. So you can be a committee member and give your services. But we wish to ensure that the original objectives of this community are preserved, and we do it through this means, this instrumentality. So we have now got situations where people are doing that, there were organizations before that accepted Pakistanis as open membership. And so we have an organization in the UK that did. And we have people who became members by virtue of that version of the constitution. There are communities who are also experimenting with total open membership. But in no community that I know of, there is no institutional measure or means to ensure that the ethos, the objectives, the mission of that community is preserved.
So I've just had an interesting conversation with Maqbool Rahim on the stance of the Khoja community with regards to the whole constitution of a lot of their community centres dotted around the world. And he very eloquently explained to me as to why the constitution is the way that it is, and the hierarchical structure is such that in many of the centres it's only for members, and you can only be a member if you're a Khoja. He mentioned to me something quite interesting that maybe needs to be explained to the wider community, and that is the whole aim and objective of a lot of these centres is to actually serve. And one of the reasons he put forward as to why they insist on a Khoja being the president and even being a committee member is so that they can continue to serve, so that they can safeguard that, aim and objective to serve the community, to serve the Ahlulbayt alayhimus salam. I think that, of course, he mentioned something else which is very important, and that is maybe with time this may change, as it has already been changing in some of the community centres. But I also think that the Hoja community, in my humble opinion, needs to maybe do a better job in communicating that to the masses, so that non-Hojas who go to these mosques and realise that they can't become members, realise that it's not because it's a sort of superiority complex that the Hojas have against everybody else. It's rather because they want to continue to safeguard that goal of serving the community, inshallah. Next, I've come to meet Sister Amina Inlows, who is also a revert into the Shia community. She teaches at the Islamic College in London. We want to discuss whether race has played a part in our hadith literature. She has authored a paper looking at the influence of race within our traditions. She has also documented case studies of other revert women joining the Shia community, looking at their experiences.
The article, as you mentioned, is about Hazrat John ibn Huway, or John as we oftentimes hear him mentioned in our majalis, who is one of the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And the article, I would say it was born from a narration which many of us have heard, regrettably, in a lot of majalis, in which the Imam, John, peace be upon him, goes out to fight. He's asking the Imam for permission to go out and fight. And he says, by Allah, my scent is very bad and my lineage is low, my color is black. So breathe on me with paradise so my scent becomes fragrant and my lineage becomes noble and my face becomes whitened. Have you heard that?
Of course I have.
Yeah, we've all heard some variant of that or another. And I have to say that privately, I have heard a number of people question it, because obviously this is not the sort of thing which would be befitting the Imam, the companions of the Imam, especially because then it's recorded that the Imam, peace be upon him, does a dua, oh Allah, whiten his face, make his scent nice. And as, you know, to be blunt, as a certain Sheikh I know said once, it does seem a bit unusual because it doesn't seem to fit with the egalitarian ethos of Islam. And this sense that wilaya, for example, loyalty to Ahlulbayt was for everyone. I mean, it's offensive, basically. Sure. Definitely it would be offensive to someone who's black and sitting in the majlis, I'm sure, especially someone who's a visitor and is not used to these things. But it's troublesome in general to anyone who hears it. When we ask who was the slave in Karbala, who do we say? John. Yeah, we mention generally him, and generally John or Joan, the African slave. This is the name that people come up with, and it's an association. Joan is the slave is Joan, and that's that, and the African slave. So you sort of have a triangle, Joan, slave, African. Whereas if you actually look in the Maqta literature, you find, okay, in some accounts he is mentioned as being there, but there are quite a lot of slaves and free slaves who are mentioned in the Karbala narrative, who are not necessarily identified as the slave. Or attention is not drawn to them, and they're from a variety of ethnic backgrounds or unspecified ethnic backgrounds. When you look at the customs of the Abbasid Empire, which is basically from the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam on, the center of the Islamic world is much more basically in Iraq. And in that region, basically it seems that people didn't immigrate there from Africa that much voluntarily, that the Africans who were there tended to be slaves, even though, again, it wasn't the only slave ethnicity. I think we have a third layer nowadays, and that is the slave trade in the United States, going through Britain as well, and European colonialism, which made a image of a African slave in a lot of people's minds. And I suspect that image it's a subconscious idea that people have when they look at this portrayal. So when they say Hazrat Joan, the African slave, they're looking at it through the lens of all of these images. Whereas if we were living, say, in the 9th century, probably we would be looking at it from a different perspective.
One of the points that you focus on in the article was 12th Imam, the mother of the 12th Imam. Again, there are two, as far as I'm aware, of course you correct me if I'm wrong, that there are two differing opinions. One is that his mother's a Roman, potentially princess again, or that she's actually from Africa. Yet in my experience, most people, I haven't done any research, but when I speak to scholars about this, the response I tend to get is, according to my own research, she's definitely she's European, the mother is European, yet you were questioning this particular.
Well, there is a split on this issue. Our earliest narrations, including in Al-Kafi, are that, as you mentioned, she's from basically around the Sudan. And there isn't a lot of detail given in those narrations. We don't have the long account as we do with respect to the narration about her being a Roman princess. And it does seem that this is something that was preferred by our very early scholars. And one can make a historical argument that this is probably the stronger account. On the other hand, there is also the narration that she was a princess from the Roman or Byzantine Empire, and we're familiar with the story there. Now, that particular narration is not substantiated. I mean, it's not a, quote, authenticated narration, which does not mean it's false. But I'm just saying there isn't a lot of textual evidence. It's related by Sheikh Saduq, and he also says she's from East Africa. So he gives both versions. Now, why is the account of her being a Roman princess preferred, historically and today? Where is a Roman princess from? If I just say that, someone might just come up and say, well, Rome. You know, Rome, Roman, European, white. This identity has been empowered in the past couple centuries, European colonialism and so forth. If you go back to, say, the 7th, 8th century, were white Christian Europeans in power? You know, were they somehow the pinnacle of civilization and we look up to them and they control the media and the economy? No, they're basically tribes, groups, some nation states. Okay, you have the Eastern Roman Empire, which is basically shrinking. It's a dying empire. The Muslims are in conflict with it. But at that time, the Islamic world was basically the height of the civilization in the region. And advancements from the Islamic world would go to Europe, not vice versa. So I don't think that in that era, people would have been looking to her as a Roman princess and looking at her and sort of subconsciously thinking, oh, she's bringing the West in with us. And, you know, I hate to say it, but a bit of a post-colonialist looking up at her. It just would have been, well, she's someone who came from the side of this empire, which is not really on good terms with us. And she was enslaved because there were Roman slaves or Byzantine slaves. And she's the mother of the Imam. But nowadays, I think there is that association of Europeanness with cultural or technological superiority. I think subconsciously, some people will get very upset if you then question that and say, well, wait a minute, she's actually from the colonialized region of the world. Like I was saying before, there are layers to what's going on, and I think if nothing else, it helps to introspect. And of course, I advise myself first, what are the different layers that are going on with respect to how we are perceiving these people and why necessarily these things should bother us. If I'm bringing up a hadith in Al-Kafi that says the mother of the Imam is from the Sudan, and then someone brings up a hadith from another book that says, no, she's from the Byzantine Empire. Okay, let's discuss that hadith, but why is it going to become a very emotional issue? And what is causing that to happen?
Can I ask you a personal question now? You yourself, as a revert, if I can use that phrase, as a white revert, whether you've ever suffered racism?
There is definitely racial exclusion if you are not in a majority ethnic group within our religious community. And by that, I'm referring to the Shi'a community. I would basically classify it as backhanded compliments. That is to say, there's a sort of, oh, mashallah, you want to be one of us. Look at her. She's European, even though I'm not European, but she's European. She's converting to Islam, and a sort of sense of, wow, this white Western person wants to come down and be one of us. I mean, I hate to phrase it that way, but that's how it comes across.
Inferiority complex.
Yes, basically a colonialist era inferiority complex. However, parallel with that is, first of all, the reminder that you are different. So because you are seen as being part of the other, you're not fully accepted into the community as an equal. And also, there are a lot of assumptions that go on with that. Probably the least of these assumptions is an assumption of ignorance. So for example, some people, and I'm not saying everyone, but some people are very excited if they see you can pray. Mashallah, sister, I've been asked, who taught you to wear hijab? I was at a gathering, actually, I hope he doesn't mind. It was at the house of one of my students at the Islamic College, mashallah. He and his wife had a baby, so I went to their house. There were a lot of people over. Someone says salawat, so I said salawat with them. Someone looks at me, she said, oh, how did you learn how to say salawat? And she looks at her friend, and she says, oh, she's so smart, she can say salawat. So you get that sort of treatment, which is, it's abnormal. Basically, you get treated as if you are abnormal, and that you don't belong. There are subtle reminders that you don't belong. Now, of course, these things do translate into bigger issues. I think in general, people of minority ethnicities in the Shia community have difficulties with marriage and these sorts of things. But apart from that, just on a day-to-day level, I think people don't necessarily recognize they're doing it. Usually it's not the in-your-face comments, it's the subtle comments that they don't even necessarily recognize they're doing. Sometimes it's just body language. For example, people physically turning away from you towards people of their ethnic group while you're sitting with them at the same table, for example. And these sorts of things can add up and bother people. Because no matter how strong your faith is, how strong your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and the Holy Quran, at the end of the day, as human beings, we do require some sort of social belonging and social community. I think different individuals have different levels of tolerance for this sort of thing. I think I'm blessed with a lot of tolerance. I am used to being on my own. So it doesn't bother me a lot if I get treated weirdly at a religious gathering. It bothers me, and it builds up over the years. But to be blunt, I know people who've left the faith because of this. And I don't blame them, because as human beings, we have social needs, we have psychological needs, and if we are unable to meet our needs in the community, it is sad, but people will go somewhere else. And this is a shame on us.
Okay, so again, Sister Amina's the discussion I had with Sister Amina was very interesting. I think there are many lessons that we can learn from it. One of the lessons we can learn is that, of course, there are many traditions that we have that need to be analysed academically. We need to be critical, and we need to be analytical in our acceptance or rejection of certain ahadith. And Sister Amina's point as well with regards to the choice of when we have two versions of events, for example, the mother of Imam Sajjad or the mother of Imam Mahdi, may peace and blessing be upon them both. Her viewpoint is that both of them carry equal weight, or at least, should be considered. Yet, over time, we've tended to incline towards those ones which made us feel more comfortable. The Persian princess with regards to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, and of course, the Roman princess with regards to Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. We definitely need to be more critical in our approach. And also, another point that comes across from the discussion I had with her is the fact that racism definitely exists, but it again is quite implicit. However, we need to be very careful about the way in which we interact with those who are new to Islam. And unfortunately, I was quite saddened to hear that it even culminated in a sister leaving Islam. Definitely something that we all need to try and fix within ourselves, inshallah. Some of you may have heard of the Ahlulbayt revert community, which was set up around about 10 years or so ago. We want to know a little bit more about the organisation and to what extent racial issues within the Shia community influenced their decision to set up the organisation, as this tends to be the opinion from those who are outside. I'll be meeting with Brother Abdul Rahim, who is part of the organisation, to speak about some of his experiences, inshallah.
What I liked and what I found about the Ark was a bunch of brothers and families that were like, well, okay, we need to have some ownership within our Islam and in our identity. Also, within that, it was a case of they also saw, as new Muslims, as people who were seasoned Muslims, seasoned reverts, that brothers were coming in, they'd come in, they'd take a shahada at the center, and then there would be no, as you would call, afterthought or aftercare. From that also, ARC was really trying to offer a support network amongst people to say, look, we're trying to create an environment where everyone can feel welcome, where no race feels inferior or feels put upon, okay? And I think primarily it being founded by people from various parts of the African diaspora, who had understood inert and the depths of racism and prejudice, I think that the organisation was better able and better equipped to deal with people who are new to these feelings and didn't understand it, feeling second class even in your own country. I mean, a lot of white brothers couldn't understand that, and white sisters, it's like, well, I'm here and why am I feeling less than? And we just tried to create a harmonious, as they said, hate-free zone. And I think that's what kind of I brought into it. And from going to the Ark, it made me a regular Majalis attender. And primarily it was because they were the only organisation that was saying, first and foremost, we're going to speak to people whose first language is English in English, so that they can bridge that gap. Because it seems as though you almost have to put on a separate, you have to inherit a separate identity to even immerse yourself within the religion. And Ark was making it easier for people to understand and you know, feel as though they could make it, because you would see people who revert, and they had different levels of Arabic, different levels of thing, but they were able to help each other along, and you know, and also offer that support and answer those questions, because they go to centre and say, well, brother, I'm feeling like this, I'm feeling like that, and you know, get a little pat on the head and say, oh, that's so bad, I'll pray for you, you know. But people actually offering them practical steps and understanding, you know, the social programming that's at play.
Shia communities have come to the UK from different parts of the world, and maybe it's historical, maybe it's because of the persecution and oppression that they suffered in different parts of the world, but an observation of the Shia community might be, at least in the past, and maybe it's opening up now, that they were quite closed and quite insular. And almost we had these different pockets based on where they came from geographically. What's your views on this?
A lot of people who came to this country, and this is my opinion, they didn't necessarily come for spiritual reasons. They migrated for safety, but they also came for economic reasons as well. And then within the economic success, they fall in for some of the traps that are laid out. Like, i.e., you live in a certain neighbourhood, you see certain people. Your interaction with people or other races and classes becomes defined by your interaction with them. And your myth are also intensified by another person's narrative of them. It's not a person, it's not an objective opinion, maybe not even a subjective opinion. It's more of an opinion of, well, this particular group do this and this particular group do that. I believe that's also what's led to a lot of the communities not having a lot of outreach, not reaching out to a lot of other people. So within that, I would even have to say some of the concerns of those who started centres was mainly, I'd say, self-preservation. They were more worried with their children's identity, and they were trying to create centres where people had a sense of pride in where they came from, because they are far removed from it. Now, within that, how do you make space for the other? And unless you're an enlightened person, you will view other people as the other. You won't have that special space for them.
But you as an individual, what have your experiences been?
I would have to say it's more ignorance. I've encountered a lot of ignorance and preconceived ideas of who I am, where I come from, what we're about. Because a lot of people's interaction with my people from my quote-unquote community are not always positive. And they've got a negative impression because of, well, the media doesn't give a positive impression of black people at all. Unless you're kicking a ball or moving around object, then you're not really that desirable. And even that's based upon a monetary worth, yeah? Or you're an entertainer, the joker. And what I noticed in a lot of the communities is that a lot of people they had old preconceived ideas. And a lot of it come down, I would have to say it's ignorance. Now, the racism aspect, when you're actually talking about physically stopping people, I'd have to say it was quite disheartening for a whole lot of years, because as a young man, right, Dating's off the table now. So it's a case of, okay, you need to be a proper man now, let's get married. And that's not happening, yeah? And for a lot of years that caused, I would say, caused a lot of pain, because you wanted to marry Muslim, but you're being told you're just not good enough, yeah? You're a successful person, you're successful in the outward world, your heart is good, as people will say, but you're just quite not good enough.
What does that not good enough mean?
Well, you're not good enough for my family, you're not good enough for my dinner table, yeah? That's how,
and you understood that to mean what?
I understood that to mean that we're not mixing our blood with any other culture outside of ours. Yeah, I understood. I'd say I empathized as a Muslim. I empathized, but I pitied the decisions. Yeah, and I don't think people understood the ramifications, because, as we've seen, there's been a lot of damage from people who wanted to marry who they wanted to, you know, purely on an Islamic basis, and it's like a case of, no, you're not for my card. Your name's not down, you're not coming in. Also, I'd even have to say, one of the harder racisms is the fact of trying to gain knowledge and being barred as well. I realised early on there was a glass ceiling of such. You could get to a certain level of education, not so much from my own perspective, but brothers who really went for it and really thought, right, I'm going to immerse myself in this, and they're being blocked for no perfect reason. Now, that block, I would call that racism, because you're blocking it because I just don't want this face doing that. And it even came to economic opportunities. You know, you're good enough to be a brother on a Friday in a Jummah, but I'm not going to give you any advice. I know times are hard, but I'm not going to give you any financial help or even give you any financial advice that might allow you to help yourself. This is how I would define those racisms.
Discussing the activities of the Ahlulbayt revert community highlights that many attitudes still require improvement. After speaking to a number of individuals from different sections of the Shia community, you can't help but feel that negative racial tendencies have been acquired subconsciously, resulting in these predispositions to sometimes be exhibited implicitly and, sadly, even explicitly. We have definitely come a long way, but it seems there's still work to be done. As highlighted, the aim here is to shine light on this subject, hoping that we become aware of this negative trait many of us probably assumed we did not possess. Only then will we be able to reflect and then refine those elements of our character that are not befitting a true believer.